Sechas Nedarim Daf Pei Tes begins with a Mishnah, which begins at the bottom of Daf Pei Ches Amud Beis. We'll have two additional Mishnayos on three different topics. So the first Mishnah discusses what happens if a woman is an almana and a grusha at the time she makes a neder, but not at the time that the neder is fulfilled, and vice versa if she's married at the time that she makes a neder, but not at the time that the neder is fulfilled. Is there a value? Is there a person who could be Mayfair? So the pasuk in describing an almana and a grusha, it says that an almana and a grusha who make a neder, no one could be Mayfair the neder, and the reason seemed to be obvious. She doesn't have a husband, and her father doesn't have rishus over her anymore, because when she's married, she goes out of her father's rishus. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah implies this cannot be the pshat in the pasuk, because that would be obvious. Clearly, no one could be Mayfair the neder, and therefore it stays upon her. So it has to be talking about where there would be somebody who could theoretically be Mayfair the neder, and that's if she made a neder now, which is to be chal, to take effect later. So the case the Mishnah discusses if she says after 30 days. Now, if she makes a neder while she's married, but then she becomes an almana grusha at the time that it takes effect, is one case. She makes a neder at the time that she's an almana grusha, and then she gets married at the time that it takes effect, is another case. What's the halacha? So the Mishnah paskins, it goes by the time she makes the neder. The time of the neder is the time they have to be made for it. Now, if she's married at that time, the husband could do a farah. If she's not married at that time, she cannot, even if she gets married later. Now, the Gemara brings a brisa that says this is actually a machlokas. What we've seen now matches exactly with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Shmuel says the opposite. Rabbi Shmuel says that you follow the time which the neder is meant to be mukuyim. If she makes the neder when she's single and it's chal at a time when she's mukuyim, when she's married, then her husband could be made for it. If she makes the neder at the time that she's married and it's chal at the time that she's single, then it cannot be mofar. So the Gemara wants to say, so the author of our Mishnah must definitely be Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, no. This brisa here is slightly different. In our case, she made the neder and it was chal after 30 days. In the case in this brisa, she made the neder and it was chal when she gets married. So in the first version, where if she made the neder when she was single, and then she got married, she said, I'm making a neder now, and it should be chal when I get married. The opposite would be if she's married and she makes a neder, it should be chal when she gets divorced. So there she made the actual kiyum of the neder totally on the event that changes her status. So it could be that even Rabbi Shmuel, who says over there that the halacha of if hafar is shaykh or not depends on the time that the neder takes effect, would agree here that it goes by the time that she says it. Why? Because over there where she makes the neder clearly totally on something changing in her status, she's obviously thinking about that time. And if she has in mind that she's going to be married at that time, because she said the neder should, if she was a single, she said the neder should take effect when I get married. She's thinking she's going to be married at that time. She probably made it alas her future husband. Or if she's married now and she says that the neder should be chal when I get divorced, she's thinking that she doesn't want it to be alas her current husband. So therefore, in this brisa, Rabbi Shmuel says it goes by her future halacha, not her current halacha. However, in our case, where she makes a neder now, she's not thinking about what's going to happen after 30 days. She doesn't think her status is going to change. She's married now. She assumes after 30 days she'll still be married. And therefore, it shouldn't follow at the halacha if it happens to change. She didn't make it dependent on that. The woman's understanding plays a big role here, because if she made the neder al das her husband, so then the husband has a much stronger hafara power. And if she didn't make it al das her husband, if she had specifically not to be al das her husband, then it is a much weaker hafara power. So that's how those two things work together. Now, our Mishnah had another phrase over here. It ended off, and it said, this is the rule. Anytime that she enters her own rishus for one moment, there is no longer any power of hafara. That's to say that her father loses the power of hafara if she becomes not part of his rishus for one moment. Now, we had a very similar statement back in Parak Nar Hama discussing how that applies to an arusa. If she goes out of her father's rishus for one moment, the husband no longer has a shared right with the father to be Mayfair Nedarim, as we said by Nar Hamarasa, it's shared between the husband and the father. And over there, also we said this expression, this is the rule. So we want to know, what is the meaning of this expression, this is the rule? What are we adding? Usually when you say zaklal, you add. So the Gemara says by Nar Hamarasa, what we added is if the father goes with messengers of the husband towards the husband's house, or the messengers of the father go with the messenger of the husband towards the husband's house, it's still in his rishus. That means to say that the husband sent messengers to come to the father's house to pick up his wife who he's marrying. And the husband went along or sent messengers along. In that case, she hasn't left his rishus yet. She's still in the rishus of the father because the father or his messengers are accompanying her. So in that case, you may think it's considered to be like she left his rishus already. There may even be a chiv mizonos. It's a sugin subis. However, the Mishnah, the extra phrase, the Hakal, is teaching that she still is in the father's rishus as far as the halachas of hafara are concerned. Now here, we said this is the rule. This is to say the opposite halacha. It's to refer to where the father gave her over to the messengers of the Baal, or the messengers of the father gave her over to the messengers of the Baal, even though she hasn't got to the husband's rishus yet. She's already out of her husband's rishus, and she's already out of her father's rishus, and any neder that she made beforehand, the husband cannot be mefer any longer. Now begin the next Mishnah, which seems to be a bit of a Mechudesh Mishnah. It's a bit hard to understand. It brings 9 cases in which no one could be mefer the neder of a woman. The Ran explains there's really only 3 cases, but Rabbi Yehuda, who's the author of this Mishnah, applies all 3 within the 3, so you end up with 9. So let's see how it plays out. The 3 cases that the Mishnah is really discussing, where the woman's out of her father's rishus and does not have a husband's rishus, is one if she's a Yisoma, that she lost her father. Another is if she's what's called a Yisoma during the lifetime of her father. That is, she was married and divorced or widowed. And once she gets married, she leaves her father's rishus, but she doesn't have a husband, so now she's considered to be like an orphan, even though her father's alive. And the third case is where she is a bogeres, that is, she's over the age of 12 and a half, and therefore she's out of father's rishus as well. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, who's the author of this Mishnah, takes the cases and puts them all together. So first he brings 3 cases where she's a Yisoma b'chai ha'av, that is, she was married and divorced, and therefore she's out of the father's rishus. They are, so the first case would be if she made the neder while she was already a bogeres, and she's also a Yisoma b'chai ha'av. Next case, he says, she made the neder while she was a nara, and she became a bogeres, also Yisoma b'chai ha'av. Third case, she made the neder while she was a nara, and she's still a nara. So bogeres has nothing to do with this, but she's Yisoma b'chai ha'av. All these 3 cases, says the Mishnah, who's Rabbi Yehuda, there's no one who could be mefer. Next, it discusses what happens if she's a real Yisoma, not Yisoma b'chai ha'av, but a real Yisoma. So it says her father had died, and she's a real Nara. She never grew up. She made the neder while she's a Nara, and she's still a Nara. Or she made the neder while she was a Nara, and then she became a bogeres, but her father is dead. Or the third one is she made the neder while she's a bogeres, and she's still a bogeres, because of course that doesn't change, and therefore she also, she is a Yisoma, and therefore there's no one who could be mefer the neder for her. Now we have 3 cases where she has no one to be mefer because she is a bogeres, nothing to do with her father. Her father's alive. The 3 cases will be if she makes the neder while she is a bogeres, or she makes the neder while she was an nara and now she's a bogeres. Or the third case, and here we quote Rabbi Yehuda, this is if somebody marries off his daughter while she's a ketana, and then she becomes divorced or widowed and goes back to his house, and she's still a nara. In this case, she is still a nara, and she's Yisoma b'chai ha'av, and therefore no one is around to be mefer for her. Now the Gemara says this is all Rabbi Yehuda, but the Chachamim say that there are 3 types of naros that you cannot be mefer: bogeres, Yisoma, and Yisoma b'chai ha'av. All right, now we get to our next Mishnah, which discusses a lady who makes a neder on condition that her husband doesn't get her ma'aseh yadayim. So she says, either I'm not going to have enough from my father, your father, if I do anything for you, you get my ma'aseh yadayim. Or she says, they won't have any hanaf from me if you take my ma'aseh yadayim. So there's different girsas as to what the Mishnah paskins. Our girs is that the Mishnah says he could be made for it, even though it's not Dvarim Shel Inui Nefesh. He could be made for it because it's Beino. It's offending to him that she made a neder like that. All right, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara brings in a brisa which discusses: can you, if you have a neder that's al tanai, can he make the neder before the tanai happens, so before the neder really exists? So the brisa says if she makes a neder saying, I'm not going to have hana from my father or your father if I work for you. So according to Rabbi Nassan, he could be meifir even if he never worked. According to Rabbi Nassan, he cannot be meifir until she works for him because the neder wasn't chal yet. According to the Chachamim, he could be meifir for her even before the neder is chal because the neder exists even though it's al tanai. Next, we have a case where she says, if I'm shamish you, I should be netuah min Yehudim. I should be separated from all Yisrael as far as halacha of tashmish is concerned. So again, until she's mishamish, Rabbi Nazan says she can't be mefer because the neder wasn't chal yet. The Chachamim say that you could. Now the Gemara brings a story. There was a man who made an iser hana on the entire world on the condition if he marries a woman when he hasn't yet learned all of halacha. Meaning he said he's going to learn a halacha, and if he doesn't learn a halacha, he can't marry a lady. And if he does, then the entire world is also for nothing. Anyway, he tried very hard to learn, and he was not able to master it. The Gemara uses this expression that he ran up and down the ladder and the rope. There's various different ways to translate this phrase, but it means that he made all the efforts that he could, and he wasn't able to be matzliach, and now he got stuck because he couldn't marry anybody. Then he would have an Isser Hana. So Rav Acha bar Rav Huna had a solution. He convinced him to marry someone, and now he just had an Isser Hana. And then he took him, he disguised him, he smeared his face with clay, and he took him to Rav Chizda to ask for a heter on the neder. So Rava pointed out that what Rav Acha bar Huna did was very smart. And he said that we need someone as wise as Rav Acha bar Rav Huna to be able to make this psak for us, because you see what he did, he made him first marry someone so that the neder is actually chal and then ask for a heter. You couldn't ask for a heter without marrying, because you have this machlokes, and according to Rabbi Nassan, you can't make a heter on a neder unless the neder is already chal. Now, says the Gemara, this is assuming that the machlokes which we saw between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Nassan by hafara applies also by hatara. Gemara says Rav Papi disagrees, and Rav Papi says the machlokes is only by hafara. Machlokes is not by hatara. Hatara and hafara are not the same thing. What's a machlokes by hafara? It's based on psukim. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya that says v'chafra halavana ubosha hachama. And Rabbi Nassan has a drasha from that. V'chafra is a lashon of hafer. Hafara, halavana means like im bina, that it's chal on bina. There's a drasha to say that means that the neder is chal. Only when the neder is chal is there actual hafara. Now, that's Rabbi Nassan's drasha that you can't be made for neder until the neder is chal, but that's only in hafara because you have the word hafara there. And the Chachamim's drasha is from the fact that it says mefer machshavos arumim, that you can be mefer even something which is just thoughts, the thoughts of the wise. You don't have to have actual neder existing. Now, but everyone agrees that she'elo l'chacham hataras nedarim, you can't be matir unless the neder already exists and it was